LinkedIn News.
Going into this work of studying happiness, I'm like, time, that's the barrier. To feel happier, I need more time. But through my work since then, I've come to realize that actually time can be the solution, because if you become a little more intentional in terms of when you're spending, that you can have sort of big effects on your satisfaction, on your happiness, on avoiding burnout without having a whole lot more time.
That's Cassie Holmes, a professor at UCLA's Anderson School of Management. I'm Leah Smart, and this is Everyday Better. Stay tuned to find out why the solution to you feeling overwhelmed isn't more free time. Before we get started, I have a favor to ask. Consider leaving us a review so we can keep bringing you more of the content that you love. If you don't know how, here's how to leave a review on Apple or Spotify. On Apple, go to the Everyday Better podcast page, scroll to the bottom, and click the number of stars you want to give. Then, right below that, click Write a Review and add your note to us. And if you're a Spotify listener, go to our page, click the 3 dots next to the settings wheel, and select Rate Show. We so appreciate your feedback. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Hey everyone, from LinkedIn News, I'm Leah Smart, and this is Everyday Better, a personal development podcast where every week I sit down with some of the world's brightest minds and bravest hearts who use science and story to help each of us flourish individually, in relationship to others, and to the world around us. About 15 years ago, Cassie Holmes hit her breaking point. She was sitting on the train on her way home from a presentation she'd given earlier in New York City. Cassie's a marketing professor, and back then she was teaching at UPenn's Wharton School of Business and living in Philadelphia. And from the moment she woke up that day, it was just one thing after another after another.
We all have these days where we're just rushing from thing to thing frantically. I was going from meetings into this very pressureful presentation, and then the presentation ends, and then I'm sort of pulled into more meetings, and then this dinner where I was also still very much on because it was with colleagues. And then I looked at my clock and I was like, oh no. I am going to miss the last train that will get me home to my 4-month-old. I had a baby in Philly and my husband asleep. And I was like, I cannot miss this train. And so I jump in a cab, yelling at a cab driver. I'm not someone who yells. And I did make the train. But I remember so vividly, I was sort of sunk into my seat. And I was looking out the window, and I was like, I cannot keep up.
It wasn't just the pressure of work, Cassie says, but the pressures of being a good mom and a good partner, plus the never-ending pile of chores and her desire to do it all well that left her feeling completely overwhelmed and depleted.
I was so exhausted, and I was like, something's got to give, but it can't give because I love my work. And I don't want to give up my relationship with my little one and my husband and my friends. I wasn't willing to give up these things that really matter.
This was the predicament Cassie found herself in that night on the train. She couldn't keep up, but she also didn't want to give anything up either. So she started fantasizing in the way many of us do. What if I quit my job, she wondered.
What if I moved to a sunny island and had all the hours of my day? Then surely I would be happier.
But of course, that was not really an option. So instead, she decided that solving this puzzle of time and happiness would become the focus of her work.
And in that night on the train where I'm like, something's got to give, but actually it's not going to be my work. Instead, I'm going to shift the work that I do to figure out how is it that we can spend the time that we have to feel satisfied and to feel full in our lives so that at the end of our years, we can look back without regret. And it's also so that we don't feel broken and instead of our schedules just being full that we feel fulfilled.
Today on the show, Cassie explains why our limited time isn't the problem, but the solution to our happiness. We'll get into where that feeling of overwhelm comes from and what we can do about it. She'll also teach us ways to reclaim our time, including a way to make the weekends feel longer and richer. Because Cassie says we have more control over our time than we might think, and that by making small changes to the way we spend it, we can see big differences in our well-being. Here's Cassie.
So I want to take a step back because many of us have this feeling of, what you describe as time poverty, right? Like we have so many things to do and not enough time. I also think this is probably very common for women, especially women who are working, who have children. But in the idea of time poverty, and I think like, what an interesting term in juxtaposition to what most people say, which is, I'm just so busy.
Yeah.
And like, there's like a sexiness to busy, I think, in some ways, if you matter when you're busy versus like, if I came up to you and said, how's life been? You're like, oh, I'm in time poverty. Like that'd be a very different conversation. But you realized and found that there's actually like negative impact to this thing that I think when we use the term busy, which is probably also time poverty or synonymous, there are negative things that happen to us and to our well-being. What are those things?
Yeah, so time poverty, which is defined as the acute feeling of having too much to do and not enough time to do it, as you pointed out, is very prevalent. So we've conducted a survey among a nationally representative sample that showed that nearly half of Americans feel time poor. And it is, to your point, more prevalent among some demographics than others. So we find in our data that there is a gender effect, which is interesting. So women tend to feel more time poor than men. Mm-hmm. Parents, particularly of kids under 4, but also when there were kids in the home. So you have kids under 18. And when you are a working parent, and the kicker is when your partner is working too, those are the individuals who are sort of most prone to feeling acutely and extremely time poor. And as you noted, it's a negative experience because we find that those who feel more time poor are less healthy, for example. They're less likely to take the time to exercise. They delay going to the doctor. It makes us less nice when we are in a hurry. We are less likely to slow down and help others out. It makes us less confident in being able to achieve what we set out to do. And it makes us less happy because we feel stressed. We feel overwhelmed. Notably, though, the definition is the feeling of having too much to do and not enough time to do it. And me highlighting that is not suggesting that, oh, it's not real. It's your fault if you feel time poor because it's just a feeling. No, but recognizing that our sense of how much time we have is somewhat subjective gives us the sort of ability of like, okay, I can do this. Mm-hmm. It's not beyond us.
I love your distinction in the fact that time poverty is a feeling because, I started with the idea of, certain demographics or people, types of people in certain situations feeling this way, but also very aware that you could be in any number of circumstances and have the feeling that you have too much going on and not enough time. And so it does allow for some more inclusivity of like the subjectiveness of that feeling. And it also asks the question of how we change the way we approach things instead of assuming that in order to feel better, things have to go away. So it's sort of like an internal approach to time poverty versus the external. Well, if I just didn't have to do half the things I have to do, I'd feel so much better, which was your first hypothesis.
Right, exactly. And to your point, so like while I sort of going into this work of studying happiness, I'm like, time, that's the barrier. To feel happier, I need more time. But through my work since then, I've come to realize that actually it's not about so much how much time you have available. It's really, okay, how do we spend the time that we have available? Because if you become a little more intentional in terms of when you're spending on those activities that really matter, that you can have sort of big effects on your satisfaction, on your happiness, on avoiding burnout without having a whole lot more time and without making big, drastic changes. Even as an example, there are very sort of immediate situational factors that can influence your sense of how time poor you are. In our work, we actually found that when you've just clearly helped someone, that you've given some time and it's had a positive effect, what that does is it actually makes people feel like they have more time, which is totally counterintuitive of like, when giving time can make you feel like you have more time. Well, how? Well, it is because you felt very effective. And then coming out, you're like, oh my gosh, I can actually accomplish a lot with the time I have, which expands your sense of how much time you have more generally, because what time poverty is this sense of constraint. It's like, I don't have the resources, in the case of temporal resources, available to achieve what I set out to do. But if you can give yourself that sense of efficacy, of agency, and actually for me, I find this shows up with exercise. Like being time poor makes us less healthy because we're like, I'm too busy. I don't have time to exercise.
It's the first thing to go. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Yet on those mornings when I do even get up early or make the time, I'm like, oh my gosh,
I did
bring
it.
it on. I can do all of this. And those, yes, it's like not that the to-do list has actually changed. What has changed is my sense of being able to effectively tackle that to-do list.
That first hypothesis you had, which I think a lot of us go to. Our list is too full. If we had less to do, we'd have more free time. If we had more free time, we'd be happier. And yet, I have definitely, and I think a lot of us have been in positions where you had a lot of free time, and all of a sudden you're twiddling your thumbs and going, well, this sucks too.
Yeah.
It's surprising, right? It's kind of shocking when you're in the place of feeling really busy that the idea of having a bunch of free time wouldn't make you feel better. But what did you find there?
Yeah, we looked at what's the relationship between the amount of discretionary time people have and their happiness. And we analyzed data from the American Time Use Survey. So it captures among tens of thousands of working and non-working Americans how they spend their regular day. And with that, we could calculate how much time they spend on discretionary activities and relate that to their reported life satisfaction. What we found is the data looks like an inverted U shape. It's like a rainbow or an arc where happiness goes down on both ends of the spectrum. So we see that, yes, those with too little time in this data set, those with less than approximately 2 hours of discretionary time in the day were less happy. Those are the time poor amongst us, and that's because they feel stressed. But what was interesting was the other end of the spectrum, we saw that happiness went down too, suggesting that there's such thing as having too much time. In this data set, it was those with more than approximately 5 hours of discretionary time in the day were less happy. And that was because of lower sense of productivity, that these people felt less productive and lower sense of purpose. And from that, they feel less satisfied. Now, I will say that those who had a lot of discretionary time, but spent that time in really sort of fulfilling, enriching ways, that they did volunteer work, or they engaged in a hobby that was enriching and personally developing, or actually really investing in their relationships, you didn't see this drop off. It's not that more and more time was better. But what this points to is that there's this wide sort of swath in the middle between 2 and 5 hours of discretionary time where the relationship is flat. And for that, there's sort of two components of it. One is, okay, what are those activities that I really need to protect my time for or make time for, those sources of satisfaction, the part of your work that contributes to your sense of purpose, versus those activities that fill your time almost like mindlessly. I have my students track their time. Actually, I suggest folks do this, is over the course of a week, tracking your time, writing down for each half hour, what are you doing? So your activity, and going more specific than work or socializing. But if you're at work, what particular work activity are you doing? Are you in a meeting? Are you, developing a PowerPoint? Are you, as importantly as writing what you did, is rating on a 10-point scale. How did you feel? And notably, this isn't me asking you, in general, what are those activities that bring you joy? Because we're not honestly all that good at predicting that or sort of even capturing it. This is from your own true experience. What are those activities that are satisfying? What are those activities that are less so? And there's some surprises that show up. So, my students will be like, oh my gosh, these activities that I look forward to as, sort of me time of social media or of watching TV, turning on Netflix at the end of the day. And then they look at their actual ratings. It's like, not only is it not very good, but it's actually pretty middling, if not negative. Or for TV, that first half hour is fun. But hour 1, 2, as you keep, clicking next episode, then people's experience of it actually can get quite negative. Meanwhile, these activities that, we might dread of like exercise, but seeing how it actually made you feel, not only from the activity itself, but the carryover effects, there is a lot of insight we can gain about ourselves of what are those pieces of our week that are sources of energy and joy, and what are those that are perhaps more draining.
So let's just say we time track and we identify that there are some areas in which we don't feel so good. Like you've talked about these areas, commuting or doing chores. What do we do? And I know you've talked about a couple of these ideas of, outsourcing and bundling, but are those the things that you'd say we should be focusing on for a lot of the areas that don't make us feel good? Or do we change our relationship to what doesn't make us feel good?
Both. So for those activities that we do have to do, you do have some chores that you're going to have to do. Bundling is a really helpful one. So this is coming out of research by Katie Milkman and her colleagues, and it's a really simple idea, but has a really big effect. Whereas this activity that you have to do, and that time feels quite painful because it seems like a waste or it's boring, and bundle it with something that is more enjoyable and more fun and more satisfying. So commuting, actually, if you look at from the time tracking, commuting is one of those activities that on average make people feel less happy. And so what if when you get in the car, instead of, mindlessly flipping through radio stations, you turned on a podcast, Every Day Better, and then you get to work and you've just learned something. So no longer is it a waste of time. We have these times in our day that we're just sort of moving through. And if you make it so that time itself feels more enjoyable, then that time isn't so much a waste, and yet you've gotten the chore done. Also to outsourcing. So this is coming out of research by Ashley Willens and colleagues, where they find that, and this is actually controlling for income level, that we are sometimes reluctant to spend money so that we can save time. Because we can do it, we should do it. Mm-hmm. But that's not recognizing just how valuable our time is, and that it might be worth spending some money to offset it. So, these grocery delivery services, I actually use a meal service because I don't like going to the grocery store. I'm a terrible cook. And the time at the end of the day where I actually get to see my kids for those few hours, I don't want to spend it rushing from the grocery store, missing out on it, or, in the kitchen, not chatting with them. I want to, by the time, my daughter and son set the table, we're sitting down and I actually get to spend that time in a really quality way. And so it is worth it for me to spend a little bit more money on a meal service to buy better time. So both bundling and outsourcing are ways that you can dial up the impact of the good stuff and dial down the impact of the bad stuff.
Coming up, Cassie and I dig into her research on what activities produce the most joy and meaning. And spoiler alert, it's not what you're expecting.
The experiences that people share of their great sources of joy are often really mundane, really ordinary.
We'll be back in just a few moments. And we're back with Professor Cassie Holmes.
I mean, you also talk about this idea, which I really loved, was that like the research actually shows that some of the activities that give us the most satisfaction or happiness are actually the most mundane. Because listen, I am a proponent of, I'm like, spend the money so you don't have to use your time. But it's like, that doesn't mean that you have to go on a vacation to Italy or, it's like some of the wild things we make up in our minds don't have to happen in order for us to find happiness, even if we do choose to outsource.
Yeah. And in my work where we've looked at what are those activities or those experiences that really contribute to our joy and happiness in life, and we found that the experiences that people share of their great sources of joy are often really mundane, really ordinary. Like, for me, it is my weekly coffee date with my daughter. Some share it is the evening walk with their partner around the block. It is waking up and, noticing like a beautiful sunrise. It's these little moments, but what they do require is paying attention. And these little moments, it's so easy not to pay attention because there's so much part of our daily lives that we don't notice them. And hedonic adaptation is our psychological propensity to get used to things over time. So when you do the same thing again and again, you're with the same person, you're exposed to the same situation, we get used to it over time such that it stops having as intense of an emotional impact on us. Now, it's good that we adapt to the bad stuff because it makes us resilient, but it's bad that we also adapt to the good stuff because it means that we don't notice it anymore. And so the way that we can offset hedonic adaptation so that we can continue to experience and notice the joys from those simple pleasures in life is to recognize that, in fact, the time is limited. Like, even though those things are part of our everyday experience now, they're not going to continue to happen every day. And so an exercise that is quite poignant is to count your times left. So my example of my coffee date with my daughter, Leah, it is something that we have done once a week since she was 4. Now she's 9. So we've gone on a lot of coffee dates in the past. But then I was like, okay, how many coffee dates do we have ahead of us? She's 9. In just a couple of years, she's going to want to go to the coffee shop with her friends instead of me. So it's going to become less frequent. Then she's going to go off to college. Then she's going to go be your neighbor in New York. And so it will be much less frequent. And I did this calculation where I'm like, oh my gosh, Leah and I have only 36% of our coffee dates together left in our life. So what does that do? Well, it makes me pay attention. In those weeks where I feel extremely time poor, where there's so much on my to-do list, I am rushing from thing to thing. It is like, no, I need to protect time and make time for these coffee dates. But also what it does is it makes me pay attention during that time, right? And we are prone to distractions. For those of us who are, perpetual planners, or we're just in our head, like thinking through what's next, what do I have to prepare for, pulling us out of the current experience. Having counted, not only do I make the time, but I make sure I put my phone away and pay attention to these these minutes. It's not a lot more time. It's 30 minutes each week, but those 30 minutes have a tremendous impact on how I feel about my life overall, fueled by this really important relationship that I've invested in with my daughter.
As you were doing this, I was thinking, God, I have a dog and she's 11. And I was literally writing down, I'm terrible at math. So I was writing down, like, she's 11. I've done, let's just say an average of 2 walks a day for 11 years. Have way more time behind me than I have ahead. And so, those moments where you're like in the morning trying to get out the door, and whether it's a child or a roommate or a partner or a dog, that other being is annoying you because you have to get out the door. You're not thinking about the fact that, like, oh, how many more times will this person or this being annoy me?
Yeah.
How many? And so, like, is it really so annoying to go for a walk in the morning? Not really. And that changes the way that you look at things. And it actually brings me to something I know you've talked about, which is fun time versus meaningful time.
Yeah. And it's so important because you can shift these sort of ordinary moments into something that is actually quite extraordinary, right? And you use the example of walking your dog. I've heard also people sort of, it resonates as you're saying, like driving your kids to school. These are activities that we can or tend to sort of rush through. It's just something to get done. But once you realize, like, oh, there actually are limited, it's like, how many more walks do you have with your dog? And not to make it sad, but to make it be like, actually, this is a really neat thing. I get to be outside with this, furry, fuzzy thing that you love so much. It's like, you're spending the time anyway, instead of being annoyed and trying to get through it, of actually just being in it in such a way that it is a source of enjoyment. And driving kids to school, it's not going to last forever. And it is that opportunity to be together, talking about what's coming up in the day, or like playing the fun song where it's basically, like a karaoke party on the way to school. It's really how you show up during those times that make those times potentially sources of joy and satisfaction. And it doesn't require more time, right? It's like you're spending the time anyway. But it then becomes not something that you're moving through and checking off your list. It becomes in itself a contributor to a joyful, satisfying day.
So we've been having conversations about time management on this show, like in different ways. And what you just said makes me think about the fact that I can do the conceptual math on how many times I have left to drive my kids to school or walk my dog, or, part of the reason that I think it gets so stressful, I just using my own life as an example, is like, well, I have to get on the train. I have to get to work. I have to get to a meeting, which takes me back to the idea of time management and actually like doing something practical that allows me to enjoy these moments instead of being so stressed about the next one. What have you found that's useful to do so that we can spend this kind of more meaningful time in an intentional way without the extra weight of everything that's coming in the rest of our day?
Yeah. And so like the second to last chapter of my book, I sort of talk about time crafting, and it is pulling from what you learned in your time tracking exercise and recognizing the effects of hedonic adaptation, and sort of pulling a lot of these insights and bundling and outsourcing a lot of these insights together to like, okay, how do you design an ideal week? And that week will have those things that you have to do. But also within that week, it is within the sort of, structure of those requirements of like, if you have to get on the train at the same time every day and, get off the train at the same time. Okay, sure. Those are in that calendar, but the rest of it, all right, where do you protect time for? So my coffee date with my daughter is in the calendar and protected. For me, it is a couple of morning runs during the week that is in the calendar protected, because I know those are very easy to let go by the wayside. I also actually have protected work time that is for the work that matters to me. And so there's so many reasons why designing and crafting your week in this way is helpful, because A, it sort of is a commitment to yourself to prioritize what matters. B, you're placing these things so that the good stuff has as big of an impact as possible and the bad stuff has their sort of smallest impact as possible. But also it allows you to be present during those important times, because you're like, I know that this is the time dedicated to this. I know when I will get all the other sort of logistical stuff done. It's in my calendar too, so I don't have to think about when it's going to happen and if I can get to it. It allows you to sort of fully invest in and be there when you're spending that time. So you're not moving through and just checking things off the list.
It's funny. I've heard of time blocking and I've done it at times, but maybe like the intention's different in this, because what I'm hearing as you're describing this is like, we have to do that first exercise, that full week of auditing our time, how we're spending it, how it makes us feel, in order to be good at the time crafting. Like, if I don't know what I'm protecting and why I'm protecting it, then I'm sort of like out there. It feels like I'm just like running wild. Like times that I've done time blocking, it's because I'm like, okay, no, I have to work on this and I have to do this. It doesn't feel like I get to do this because I know that it's important to me. And so like that orientation of what am I owning when it comes to my time and what am I protecting feels much more energizing than like, what am I putting on my calendar to make sure that I get done throughout the day? It's that right. Which feels so much more, you end your day with your time blocking and go, well, I did it all, versus like, oh, I did the things that I know for sure make me feel good. And that is the win, is that I protected my time versus I used my time or spent my time on the things I had to get done. I do have a question for you about work, because, a lot of people, if they haven't already, are approaching moments where they're going to have to return to the office. And we're in this, 4-year lag of what COVID has done for so many of us when it comes to work. And it's been really positive in many ways and tougher in others. But ultimately, we are all facing a big change in returning to the office, whether it be 3 days or 5 days a week. And one of the things that you shared, I think, has a lot of power in the way that we reorient ourselves to a life that many of us did live before 2020, but have forgotten because it's just not muscle memory anymore. And that's treating the weekend like a vacation. You shared that increases happiness. And gosh, how simple, right? But I don't think that most of us do it. So how do we do that? How do we reframe our minds around that?
Yeah. And so it is simple, and the intervention is really simple. So what we did is we ran an experiment among sort of working Americans, and we gave them a simple set of instructions on the Friday leading into a regular weekend. We told some, treat the weekend like a vacation. That is, to the extent possible, behave and think in ways as though you're on vacation. We told the others, treat this weekend like a regular weekend. That is, to the extent possible, behave and think in ways as you would on a regular weekend. And then on Monday, when they returned to work, we measured their happiness again. And what we found was that those who had treated the weekend like a vacation were significantly happier on Monday when they returned to work, and they enjoyed the weekend more. And then the question is why, right?
Right.
And there were some differences in how they spent their time, but actually the thing that drove their enjoyment of the weekend and their satisfaction when they returned to work was really their mindset.
But what does it mean, though, to treat the weekend like even just saying that, I'm like, well, I don't know how to...
It's funny because what seems to happen is that people associate vacations with a break. That is, it is the break from routine, whereas our weekends sort of tend to be a routine where we are moving through our activities. That doing mode carries over into our weekend where we're moving through our activities, checking them off the list. When people are treating the weekend like a vacation, they're not moving through it. It's like, oh, this is actually a break from my routine. And so what it is doing, it is breaking you out of the routine of doing, and it allows you just to be. That's what vacations are, the breaks that we give ourselves. And we have in our lives. It's just we don't always treat them like the breaks that they are. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't even need to be the whole weekend. Some people are like, well, that's when I got my chores done. And it's like, okay, well, why don't you carve out Saturday? And then Sunday, you can do all the stuff that you have to do. But even treating this Saturday like a vacation, we just mentally approach it differently and we experience it differently.
I love that idea of treating just even Saturday like a vacation and seeing what happens. So I'm going to try that. And I'm always curious, how has the work that you've done changed you?
Oh my gosh. Well, like in every way, it's informed what I work on because I'm trying to answer questions that I will implement, but also it is a constant reminder of when I'm teaching the material, I'm like, oh yes, I need to make sure that I implement this. And it works. Like it reminds me to continue to pay attention during those like precious moments. It reminds me to continue to make those decisions of being intentional about where I spend my time, what I say yes to, what I say no to. And it's like such a joy to like hear from readers of how it shows up in their lives. And then with my students of seeing how these insights sort of show up and get applied and get realized. And so that is like yet its own sort of motivation.
Yeah, and so rewarding, I'm sure. Cassie, I'm going to have you complete these 3 statements for me. Better humans are?
Happy, because they're nicer.
Better work is?
Purposeful.
And a better world has?
More joyful people.
Love that. Cassie, thank you so much for being here. This was great. I'm walking away with like, I need to go do my time tracking. So thank you. I will put it on my calendar to start.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having me.
That was Cassie Holmes, professor and author of Happier Hour, How to Beat Distraction, Expand Your Time, and Focus on What Matters Most. Find it wherever you get your books or on Audible. If you found this conversation good enough to tell somebody about, do it. Text this episode to the first person who comes to mind. You never know how it could make their day a little better. Everyday Better is a production of LinkedIn News. The show is produced by Grace Rubin and Emily Reeves. Asaf Gadron is our sound engineer. He makes sure we sound good in the studio. Tim Boland mixed our show. Enrique Montalvo is the executive producer of LinkedIn Editorial Productions. Dave Pond is head of news production. Courtney Koop is head of LinkedIn Original Audio and Video. Dan Roth is the editor-in-chief of LinkedIn. And I'm Leah Smart. Thanks for coming with me, and I'll see you next week.